Hello. Welcome to our little movie and TV show podcast. This is fine. I'll watch it. This is a show about finally watching the critically acclaimed cult classic or just super popular stuff that's been on our watch list for ages that we just haven't gotten around to for some reason. This is a DTV podcast, the first of its kind, hosted by all recent DePaul grads. My name is Hailee Rose. I have a BFA in film and TV with a concentration in screenwriting. That's some DePaul lingo for you. This is Olivia.
Hi, I also met a recent DePaul alum with a BFA in film and television with an emphasis in direction.
And this is Isabelle.
Hello. I'm like a year graduated now. From the Media and Cinema Studies program. And I'm getting my master's degree in that as well.
Okay, double teamed. We're all recent grads and lifetime media consumers. This week we wanted to talk about Game of Thrones. Everyone knows about Game of Thrones. If you're a DePaul student listening to this, and you've ever taken, Screenwriting 101, Screenwriting 100.
The first class you've ever
Any
taken.
class that you've taken. They've probably mentioned it at some point. This is a super important show culturally. It broadcast originally from 2011 to 2019 on HBO and is a television adaptation of a book series, A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. In its 8 seasons, it received over 150 Emmy nominations, receiving 59 total Emmys, holding the most Emmy nominations for a drama series. Just a quick little. Over time, it won several big hitters like Outstanding Drama Series and Outstanding Supporting Actor. People love this show. It regularly drew in over 10 million viewers per weekly episode towards the beginning of the show and towards the final season, according to Miss Hollywood Reporter. It drew in over 44 million viewers for its weekly releases. So this isn't a show without its faults, though. As many who know anything about the show or have taken, as Isabelle said, a math class at DePaul, the show had a fall from grace in the latter seasons as they ran out of books and had to come up with original material to cover this fact up. Game of Thrones, despite its cultural relevancy, has a sliding scale of the type of popularity you associate with famous rather than infamous. Though Empire names it number 3 on the best shows of all time, Variety marks it number 21 on the same list, and the show isn't even mentioned in the Rolling Stones same list, best television show of all time.
Ouch.
Yeah, baby.
Ouch.
The reaction to the decisions in the final season have been called anything short of blasphemous by critics, press, and fans alike, and overall has affected the show's murky and sometimes skewed legacy. George R.R. Martin has still not released the final book in the series, marking a whopping 13 years since the last book release. However, the show remains in the zeitgeist and continues to flourish amongst fans and even in spin-offs, with HBO's House of the Dragon now reportedly crushing the numbers previously mentioned for Game of Thrones, and 4 prequel series that are currently in different stages of development at HBO. Let's be honest, it's hard to talk about drama TV without talking about Game of Thrones. Very, very true.
That's the first thing I think of when I think of drama.
It's the first thing I think of when I think of HBO.
Yeah.
That too.
Next
to The Sopranos.
Yeah.
You two have had a recent experience with watching this. Tell me a little bit about why, before this, you guys have recently binged all the show. Before this, why hadn't you seen it?
Okay, so I'll answer because I didn't watch it live. I have a big thing about FOMO, right? And so I'm either going to get there right at the start or just never touch it when it comes to huge shows that are talked about. Game of Thrones being one of them. For me, I think it was an age thing. This came out when we were kind of younger. 2011, I was 9. So I'm not exactly the target audience for a show like this. As time went on, it felt like you're just so far behind in these massive and lengthy episodes and arcs and stories and seasons. And you're so knee deep that you're not going to join that type of fan base right away. So it was one of those things where I'll watch it when it's done. And then HBO did the ending the way that they did the ending for Game of Thrones, and it was so notoriously bad that I was like, well, now I have no need to see the show, because I would hate to start a show that I would hate the ending to. Then House of the Dragon came out, and the FOMO struck, and so I had no choice but to watch So I watched House of the Dragon, which is a prequel, so it was totally safe to do so. And I love House of the Dragon season 1 so much that I binged all 8 seasons in about a month and a half.
Isabelle has seen all of this show many a time.
Many times.
And she showed Olivia.
Yeah.
A month and a half, 2 months.
And I think we only even watched House of the Dragon just because House of the Dragon season 2 was coming out. So again, it's that thing where everyone's talking about it. It's in the air again. You might as well jump in and be a part of the conversation.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I wasn't the target audience at the time it came out.
Yeah. So we know why you haven't seen it. I'm gonna let you answer that, but let me ask you a different question.
Okay.
Why had you at age 10 seen it?
I hadn't seen it at age 10.
She was like, I was 11.
I think 8th grade.
So a cute 13.
Cute 13.
Hey, a teenager.
Well, the thing was,
it's like, a part of it.
It's a part
everyone in my family was watching it, and it was a thing where my mom would be like, "Okay, your older sister and I are gonna watch Game of Thrones. You have to go to your room," and that was like soul crushing to me because I was
FOMO.
Like, FOMO. I was like, "What am I supposed to do in my room?" We were very living room people. So then, like, I think, like, end of season 5 as it was coming out, like premiering on Sundays, I was like, I'm just gonna be here on the couch. I was like, I'm not watching this. But then, Jon Snow dies, and I was like, well, he's kind of cute. And because I'm 13, I'm a girl. That just is what happened to me. I was like, he's cute. He's dead. And I was like, what happens next? What happens next? And then it was a situation where my mom was like, whatever. And I went back and I watched all of the seasons, so I was completely caught up for when season 6 came out. So then I watched all of season 6, 7, and 8 as they came out.
I will say what's pretty unique with the degrees that we have. I went into watching Game of Thrones with absolutely 0 spoilers.
Yeah, I had every spoiler.
And I want to say to the people that haven't seen Game of Thrones,
don't
and they're
watch
like,
this.
And one, don't watch this. But if they haven't seen Game of Thrones and they're also faced with okay, fine, I'll watch. Or it's like, oh my God, I just haven't gotten around to seeing it yet. Not a big deal. I understand why people don't watch it, because if they know the spoilers, they have no interest in.
Right.
Before we talk about the ending, I also think that the show has sort of this, like, when I was a kid, my parents used to watch Sopranos weekly, and my parents would have all of our neighborhood friends over, and they would cook from the cookbook once a week.
That's fun.
Oh my gosh, it's an experience.
It was like, and you don't really get that with streaming anymore because everyone can watch it whenever they want to. And there's definitely benefits to that, of course. I mean, like, hey, baby, I'm a binger.
I'm a binger too. I don't know if I could have done Game of Thrones week to week.
No. It's tough weekly.
Yeah.
But there is something to be said about, like, this is an hour of my time and I'm going to put it aside and, make an event out of it. I think this is probably, especially as, like, what a time to have your show come out. 2011 to 2019.
For sure.
Yeah.
Things are changing, baby.
Social
Things
media plays such a big part of that fan base.
And streaming services.
Yes.
Like,
all of it.
it's definitely like a product of one of the last sort of shows that I would find myself, that I think you could look at and be like, okay, I'm gonna sit down at 8:00 on Sunday night or whatever. Even now, that happens, but if you miss it, you just go on streaming and watch it.
Right.
And that's why I would say, like, the only other show that has happened in recent history from my memory is Euphoria. It was like a weekly Sunday watch.
Yeah.
And again, HBO is like notorious for that.
And
exactly.
It's still on air. Like, Euphoria is still airing on cable.
Yeah.
Same thing with House of the Dragon. But, like, it was like, I remember watching, like, season 8 of Game of Thrones as it was coming out, and, like, I would watch it Sunday night, and then the next morning I would get up before school and, like, rewatch it on HBO Go at the time. And that was kind of revolutionary that I, like, had, because, like, when I was watching it for the first time, I was, like, on demand Xfinity going through seasons, like, very kind of old.
It's a ritualistic thing to, like, have to click to it instead of it just, like, already being in your Twitter edits or, like, already being talked about.
Or, like, you open up your TV and it's just there, and you're like, well,
it's like a physical, conscious effort
to have to do it.
Yeah. I'd also say streaming has played into how many options there are. Whereas, like, when you have a Sunday night release, it's like, well, how many other things are on a Sunday night? You might as well watch it. Even if you're not, again, the target audience of Game of Thrones. There's a lot of reasons to fall into it. Game of Thrones just a massive fan base because it was, like, the talk of the town every single week.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was just,
I'm not a big fantasy girl, But in the same way, I can get into the fantasy. Like, I can get into the...
You see the appeal.
I
for
100% see the
I think
appeal.
it's, yeah.
And I also just love TV from an analytical perspective
Right.
as well.
That was like me with Breaking Bad.
For
I'm
sure.
like, I get why people like this. It's not super my thing, but like I'm like watching it and I'm understanding why
It's
as big as
respect,
it is.
yeah. I don't watch any TV unless I'm like forced to, or again have FOMO. If I don't like it, I will not watch it.
FOMO is a powerful thing.
It really is, yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about the pilot. I've seen the pilot probably about 3 or 4 times for different screenwriting classes. But Olivia had never seen the pilot before. So
Yeah.
Isabelle, like, walk me through what your thought process was showing Olivia the pilot, especially with her crippling FOMO.
Her crippling FOMO. Yeah. Well,
And judgment.
and she's very judgy.
I will give it a try, but I won't
Yes.
donate my time fully if I don't like
Right. And so that's what, like, with House of the Dragon, I was pretty confident that you were going to like that pretty quickly, just because it got really big on TikTok, and I was like, Olivia will enjoy it, because there's, like, TikTok sounds in this. Do you remember? I pointed out, like, 3 that I was like, she was like, oh, that's on TikTok, and I was like,
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah,
I just
the Negroni thing, too.
Right. I just
Yeah.
like the actors in it. So
Yeah.
I was like, I don't see why not. And again, Notorious. I think what stuck out is that it was action upon action upon action. Like, you can't look away.
Yeah. Every
Also-
episode is just packed.
The FOMO is so true, but it's also like with The Sopranos, it was like water cooler sort of next day at work.
Yeah.
I'm sure my parents threw that party just as much for everyone else as they did for themselves.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
you want to know what everyone's talking about
Yes.
the next morning.
Yes.
And it sort of becomes that same thing too, even though there's so many different sides of the internet, when it breaches into yours, you're
Mhm.
like, what the hell?
I think their
Sort of
promo just was really
TikTok and
good.
Twitter. Yeah, their
I'm
promo-
very
I mean, it's
susceptible to
HBO.
marketing.
Yeah.
If you have good marketing or a
Yeah.
good campaign, like,
So,
respect automatically.
you're,
Yeah.
But I
I'll fall
do
for it.
think I do think like season 1 of House of the Dragon in my mind is very comparable to like season 6, season 7 of Game
Yeah.
of Thrones, where it's just, and not even in terms of like quality and writing, all of that, but just in terms of like pacing, like
Mhm.
it just is kind of a little quicker. I mean, season 1 of House of the Dragon is very rushed because they're trying to like lay down the foundation, but so I was a little worried how to be so honest, I was a little worried how Game of Thrones was going to get.
After I
'Cause
watch House of the Dragon.
Because
Yeah.
I knew that, like, okay, like, once you get into it, you're really into it. But I was, like, starting in season 1, there's just a million more characters in House of the Dragon, and they're all over, then House of the Dragon, they're all over the place. Like, you have, Dany is, like, on the other side of the world from Jon, and then you have all of these houses, whereas in House of the Dragon, you have the Targaryens and the High Towers, and that's, like,
I
legit.
will say, for a pilot, this is a crazy way to go about introducing characters to an audience.
It is
Of just
like,
not connecting them until like
introduction.
maybe the end of the season.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because the official like HBO logline for this episode, the pilot, is Lord Ned Stark is troubled by disturbing reports from a Night's Watcher deserter, and King Robert arrives at Winterfell.
What do any of those words mean?
I don't know. I had a hard time reading
No
that.
one can read that knowing nothing about Game of Thrones and be like, this piques my interest because of this word. It's
no.
like you have to know what that is going in.
You
It's
just
so
have to
intimidating.
Click on it.
Well,
Yeah.
You just have to watch it.
how did you feel watching the pilot? Because you had just seen House of the Dragon. Obviously, something, especially with the pacing of House of the Dragon, it's made for, a different time period.
For
so it's
sure.
going to go less quickly. But aside from that, like, did you see the vision immediately? Or were you like, did you see why Isabelle and, the entire world always talks about it immediately? Or were you just kind of like, like, maybe this is more of a slow burn for me?
Absolutely. I think when I'm watching Game of Thrones, I'm like, oh, okay, I recognize that blonde one. That must be a Targaryen. And I only know the name Targaryen because House of the Dragon.
Yeah.
Everyone else, I'm like, who are you? So I think it was helpful to have Isabelle with me to just be like, okay, so you're going to see, but this is going to be the king and X, Y, and Z. And so I'm like, okay, I can start piecing it together. But once you understand that there is 70 plot lines going on at one time, and they all are about motive and execution, if you just get that rhythm, then you'll kind of be pretty set to follow it. Obviously, watching the pilot, I'm not understanding that from the get-go.
Yeah.
But I think it's helpful knowing that going in.
Revisiting the pilot, for you. How is it like? Do you remember when you watched it for the first time? And also, what is it like rewatching that?
There are only a couple scenes that I remember from the first time that I watched it, and that was mainly Joffrey stuff. I think rewatching, looking back, having watched it so many times, like it very much, season 1 very much is like a murder mystery. An episode, like
For sure.
Like the pilot is trying to figure out who killed John Aaron, who you never see. It's kind of one of those things that almost like haunts the narrative a bit. So I think rewatching it for me, it's just like really fun because I think the first time it's just like character introduction is all you're getting out of that. But then when you like really are understanding what the story is, you're like, oh, like you can see the pieces moving to like something is starting. There's a reason why we started here and not 5 years later.
Pilots are funny because everyone comes at them from a different experience with the show and a different perspective, especially when you have a show so popular that this one is, or even just like so like talked about, so relevant.
Well, the expectations are crazy.
It's even in like an expectation way, or even in like having other influences obviously makes your watching so much more subjective. For example, if all you knew about the Game of Thrones first season was that Isabelle said it's a murder mystery, when you go in to watch the pilot and you watch what you watch on HBO, you'd be like,
for sure.
But any other outside force is going to contribute to how you feel about it, especially since it's so popular too. Like, I wonder like if either of you had a thing watching the pilot where you're like, this is going to be good. Because I feel since when you started it, and even when you started it, it had already been so many Emmys deep.
Yeah.
If someone told me something was good, then I'll be like sitting there waiting for it to be good.
That's exactly what it was the entire time.
Yeah.
I can respect the character establishment. I can respect the acting. I can respect the sets, the costumes. But for me, it's story that's going to really take this to the next level. So the second that man is pushed out of a window because the brother and the sister are having sex, I'm like, oh, this is going to be crazy. Yeah. I have to see what's going to happen next. I need to know.
It's a good closer.
It's a perfect closer. And I would say that closer made the rest of like the entire beginning of the episode, which is so jumbly and confusing, worthwhile. Because it's like, I know this is going to pay off. And I'm going to keep going because of this ending.
Bran getting pushed out of the tower was like a preamble to like the main character dying.
All of the things you hear of Game of Thrones is like, oh, everyone dies. Everyone dies. Everyone dies. And then in that moment, I'm like, oh, everyone really does die.
I would love to know, when was the moment when you were like locked in? When were you like, I'm gagged and this is sort of all I can think about?
The first episode I watched was Hard Home, which was the first big White Walker battle.
Crazy.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Crazy episode. Huge episode. First episode I ever watched. And so I was like, this is crazy. I was like, the production to me is 11.
So you were locked in before you watched the show.
Yeah.
You were in it for the long haul.
I was in, but I think
she's like, finance. She's like,
I'm
how
like,
much do you think this costs?
Yeah. And then I watched the season 5 finale, which was Dany riding Drogon for the first time ever.
Crazy.
And Jon Snow dying. And I was like, yo.
You got spoilers like purposefully.
Yeah. I think going back and watching it at the point where, because the first season I was like, okay. I was like, when do we get somewhere? I think the first time I was like, oh, okay, it was Dany when she takes the Unsullied and she like, they're speaking about her in her own mother tongue the whole time. And then like at the very last minute, she's like, actually, I can speak Valyrian also.
Well, this just goes to show that you're such a Daenerys girl and I'm just such a Jon Snow girl.
I'm such a Daenerys girl.
Because for me, like, I was like, fun, exciting, but I'm still waiting for something even cooler to happen.
What was yours, Egret?
No, it was definitely Ned Stark. 100%. I was I'm in this forever and ever. Yeah. But again, same thing where you were like, I'm in it because season 5 is good. I'm in it because House of Dragon was good. Right. So I was gonna stick it out as far as I could. If I really hated like the end of season 2, I'd be like, I'm gonna let this go. But that's kind of impossible. So I think season 1 was them again proving to me that they're gonna take this for the long ride and it's gonna be totally worth the watch.
I just love.
Also, Isabelle is great at peer pressure.
Yeah.
Oh.
That'll really do it.
I forgot about that. Yeah. There's obviously so many like big moments in this show. You guys always talk about. Even right then, you mentioned like literally 5 different things that you were like, I was gagged.
Yeah.
And it's like not even the main reason to be. Yeah.
just sort of on that a little bit, what's a moment that you wish people talked about more?
I would say there's a lot of key moments, but unless you're a fan, it doesn't really matter because you can hear a spoiler and then it just not register because you don't know the characters' names. I will say, so the only thing I got spoiled while I was watching in that month and a half span, I obviously tried to avoid everything, but I had like a Peter Dinklage edit on my TikTok. And in the comments, they were talking about him as if he was Tyrion. And they're like, ugh, to believe that Tyrion ends up marrying Sansa. And I didn't know this at this point in time. And in my head, I'm like, why would Tyrion and Sansa ever need to get married? And so I'm like, this is the biggest spoiler ever. I can't believe this ends up happening. And Isabel's like, it's a one episode arc. It's really not that big of a deal. Yeah. And it ended up being not a big deal. But I was like, oh my God, how did people not talk about this way earlier on? Like, that's a crazy direction for those characters to end up finding their way that way.
Yeah.
Why would they ever get married?
Yeah, I think,
I wanted to talk about that for a while because that was a crazy plot point to me. And just no one else cared the way that I did.
You scared me with that. You were like, I saw a spoiler, and I was like, what did you see? And you were like,
Daenerys dies.
Like, and Sansa. And I was like, oh. I was like, whatever.
So I'm kind of like, that's the only thing where I'm like, why don't people talk about that more? But it's like not that big of a deal, so I get why they don't.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's moments that I love that I think kind of slip through the cracks. I think there's a lot of Rob's story that I really love that is just never really talked about. And same thing with like, you know, I think Tywin is honestly underappreciated. He only lasts for about 4 seasons, but I think he's
an instrumental
really
character.
Great, yeah.
Let's chat about this. A lot to unpack there. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the back half of season 7 and
the front half,
like season 8, last bit of the show, is a big topic to address. As anyone who was alive during the time
online,
obviously there's some strong opinions about that, going in whichever direction. But I think a good way to approach this is like, how did watching this so late change your opinion on it? And similarly, how did watching it in time with everyone else change your opinion on the last season? Yeah.
So yes, season 8 is bad for reasons of bad writing and rush ending and character assassination. These are like, unfortunately, the truth of like, everyone's going to have this opinion. I don't think anyone liked the ending, and that's valid because it was poorly done. But I think that seasons 1 through 7 for me are just so good and interesting and well done. And like, you know, all of the positives of this show, I don't regret any of the time I put into it. I think it helps. I'm not as mad at season 8 as like true diehard fans because it only took a month and a half of my life, whereas everyone else, it took them 2011 to 2019. So that's a lot of time and energy and commitment that you put into a show that disappoints you. Because like I said, trust is the biggest thing. But you only lost my trust in like the span of like 5 days when I watched that season. Yeah. So I think, yes, it was bad. No, you shouldn't not watch it for that reason.
I also think sort of like a bad ending does not a bad show make.
For sure.
Yeah. Like, I think that especially, this isn't super applicable to Game of Thrones, but like, especially coming at it from like a writing perspective, because I do feel like a lot of the dislike towards season 8 is blamed on writing. I don't know how much of that is 100% accurate. There are a lot of creatives in the room. But just to say that with current like streaming stuff, you never know when your show's going to end. A lot of shows have horrible endings. Obviously not super applicable to Game of Thrones, who knew how many seasons they were going to have.
They could have as many as they want.
They could have as many as they want. Right. But if you were to, I see your side where you're like, if we were to classify that every show with a bad ending is unwatchable in 2024.
How many shows can you watch?
How many shows would you eliminate? And obviously there's something there about like a story arc. You want to end it the way that, you know, you want it to end. Yeah. But it certainly doesn't erase all of the hard work put into other seasons.
People just like have opinions because sometimes they don't want their show to end, and sometimes they don't want to see it end the way that they have their own canon of what's going to happen. And when it doesn't happen that way, they're like, well, that's the worst ending ever. But they're still going to recommend the show 20 times over. Game of Thrones is different than The Sopranos ending in the terms of controversy, because this was just like a season of genuine like people were in despair.
What if people say like coughing baby versus like hydrogen bomb? Like, yeah, I think like
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
it's
Wait, 100%.
It's just like interesting too because even I think finales, this one in particular, even if it's like quote unquote objectively or subjectively bad, it's like the whole thing is emotion behind it.
For sure.
So it's like, and I think that it either comes from a place of you love this show and you really want it to be good, or you love this show and you really don't want it to end. And like that obviously is not an excuse for being rude and, bad behavior, but it is a nice way to think about it, where it's like all of this accumulated hate from season 8 is literally just because people wanted their favorite show to end well.
Yeah. It's impossible to please every viewer. No one's going to be happy 100% of the time. It's just like the mass amount of disappointment goes to show that you really had a fan base that loved and trusted you.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's disappointing in a different way.
100%. Yes. And now, Isabelle.
Now I can speak.
Yeah, you can speak.
Okay. I think we're going back. I'm reversing. We're going back to the original question, which was, what was it like watching it as it came out? I think watching season 7, I was not thinking critically at all. And so I was not at all. It wasn't like years later. I would say probably like COVID, I rewatched it and I was like, this is objectively horrible. So it was like 3 years later that I was like, I actually don't really like season 7 all that much. Season 8 coming out was really like that. I feel like before it was coming out, everyone was like, final season. That was like really like peak of its cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
It was like everything was Game of Thrones themed. But I think to answer the question, watching it in real time was like, episode 1, I was like, okay. Episode 2, I was like, okay. Then like
you're like bracing yourself.
Then, like the long night happened, and this big White Walker thing is happening, and we're all kind of expecting like the White Walker thing to be like the end all be all. That's how the pilot starts. It's how the show should end, and it was just kind of over. Like we spend 7 seasons being like the long night. Like we have to prep for all these things. The throne doesn't matter. We have to fight these, and then it lasts for 60 minutes, and we're like, oh. And then Arya kills the Night King, and we're like, oh. And then you go back and watch episode 4, where all of a sudden Dany is going crazy, and you're like, it just starts to get more sort of, it just spiraled, and every week just got like worse. And then by the last episode, it was pretty much clear cut what was going to happen, and I was not mentally prepared for that. I do remember sitting on my aunt's couch, just like all of us were just sobbing, like invested so much time into these characters. Dany was like our girl, you know?
Yeah.
She was just like so like,
well, she was in your living room every week.
And it was like, she was just so cool. Like she was just like the one like very sort of like feminist, going for it, doesn't really know what she's doing, but is doing it anyway, is strong enough to do it, is level-headed, like seems like
that's when I'm like,
one.
I'm just gonna blame the writers and move on, because they had accidental motives and reasons.
My thing with that, they were really good at adapting. I think they were really good at adapting from a book. I think when it came to figuring out how to close up these storylines, they were like, whatever. I don't think they were considering at all character arc. I don't think they were, I think they were just like, we can do this and this and this, and then that'll be it. When you leave season 7, you have sort of 3 women at the forefront. I mean, 4 really, where you have Dany and you have Cersei and you have Sansa and you have Arya. And these are like 4 women that are like really great sort of idols. And they're, I mean, not Cersei, no, but you know, but it's a situation where like they're all in power. Like in some way, they have agency in some way. And then at the end of season 8, Daenerys is dead. Arya just leaves. Sansa is Queen in the North simply because her and Daenerys could not be friends, because I guess girls can't be friends with each other. And then Cersei's also dead. So it's like no one, it's like, and then it's just like, we have white guy on the throne.
You come to accept misogyny, so when you're watching it, it's not as jarring.
Yeah. And
you're like, oh, of course this exists.
You know, they're iconic. Like, Dany just kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet. And it's like, what do you mean? Like, we spent like 2 episodes of her, like, managing that alliance. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, she just didn't remember. And all of her dragons are dead except for one. And, you know, she's killed by Jon Snow, who's a Targaryen for some reason, but we don't know why.
This, like,
I
sudden
love that
memory
Jonathan
loss.
Targaryen.
I think that's fun. I think that's great. I'm sure that's probably what George R. R. Martin is going to do. But it's also like you have to have a reason for making him a Targaryen. He can't just be like, and actually his mom and dad are different. Anyway,
It's like Star Wars.
it was like a huge finale level reveal.
Somehow
Palpatine
Palpatine returned.
It is that kind of thing though, where it's like, oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
But I watched Luke Skywalker push him down the Death Star.
So yeah, I had like definitely had like 6 stages of grief with season 8. Let's just say I'm just still stuck in anger. I think I'll forever be stuck in anger.
I think you're always gonna be stuck in anger.
If you
For
really
me, I've
get
accepted.
me going, it's like accepted in the way that like I can still watch the show and like I won't get mad about it because to me it's like season 7 and I know, but I don't watch season 7 and 8. So when I watched it with you, I was like just fuming because it just bothers me.
I also think that
It
it's
makes me
like,
sad.
yeah, it's like in terms of the thing where it's like, how do you separate? Can you separate your emotion from like your education? I think
Mhm.
that your emotions inform your education
Mhm.
and vice versa. Like, you know, if I didn't love TV, I never would have gotten a screenwriting
For
degree.
sure.
Right.
And I wouldn't be so, and I also think I wouldn't be so upset about shows that I don't end in the way that I think
Yeah.
they should have ended if I didn't know that someone out there, maybe even the writers that wrote the ending, could do better.
Yeah.
For sure. That's what it is. My standards are very high for you because
Yeah.
you've proven to me that you can.
There's also so many outside forces to what gets produced in a television show. Like
Mhm.
there's so many creatives, and as a writer, I don't love the idea that all of it gets blamed on the writers, which I do think is in
For
screenwriting
sure.
classes
Yeah.
they will tell you like be wary of this.
Mhm.
But obviously, you know, it's up to if you get to that success level, be wary of that. But it's also like I think that it's so complicated, and so all that I mean to say is like your education and your emotions are inseparable for a reason, and I think that will make you a better writer and a
Mhm.
Yeah.
better watcher.
I think like though with these writers for season 8, I think the biggest thing that places my blame on them is just the fact that they had been offered that Star Wars deal before they started writing it.
It doesn't look good, does it?
It doesn't.
It doesn't look good.
And hey,
then
I'm not saying-
and it's also like
Yeah.
Disney then fired them.
If a show's like bad for whatever reason, I can find the reason, and I think that's because I was schooled in it.
Yeah.
So if a show's bad and it's everyone's like, oh, it's the writing, I'm like, no, it's the acting. You know what I mean? Like there's certain
Mhm.
things where like, no, the direction is kind of bad there. Like
Yeah.
I can figure out how to blame the director versus a writer, but the general consensus is like you're gonna blame the writer.
Yeah.
Because some people don't even know what a
It's like
director
the
fully
actors
does
did
or
great
like what
for
an
what-
actor really
yeah.
does. Yeah,
It's
Game of
just
Thrones is
like-
a specific
it's
writer
just
blame for
so
me, but other
yeah.
shows I definitely
I
separate
agree with
it.
that. I think it's just so sort of disappointing that it
Mhm.
had that sort of reaction, and it makes me sad for the cast and the
It's interesting too in like a case by case kind of way, like you're saying. Like obviously no one really knows who to point the finger to.
They
But
still can't figure out who to blame the Starbucks cup on. They don't know who did that.
Yeah.
So how
No.
can we ever pinpoint?
It's untraceable.
Yeah. And the water bottle.
And the water
and the
bottle.
water bottle.
That cute like hydro flask in the back.
yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting to sort of like, and since film is so collaborative, it's like it becomes a thing where it's like the general public might be like, you know, like you said, they might be like, oh, this is writing, but you look at it, you're like, I know this is editing.
Yeah.
But it also becomes a sort of thing too, where it's a super tangled web, where it's like, but the director approved of the editing,
Right.
But the execs
100%.
approved of the-
It's like
Yeah.
the writing.
who gets the final say, but like at a certain point you have to realize that an exec is not going to halt everything in terms of timeline with marketing and
No, yeah.
publication because one
a
edit
messy-
in one scene looks kind of
Yeah.
bad.
It's a messy sort of
Mm.
thing, and it's like overall I think instead of blame in that sort of situation, I think most of all people just feel just like deep disappointment.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like I said, impossible to separate your emotions from, and you wouldn't want to. Like you wanted the show to be good because you liked it,
Mhm.
and I think that's very sweet.
Yeah.
Sort of on our last note here, overall, are you glad this is no longer on your watch list?
For sure. I will say, I don't think without the influence of House of the Dragon and Isabel, I would have ever watched it, because it was still one of those things where, as I said at the beginning, I felt like it was kind of a fan base that had this shield around them that either you get it or you don't. And I was fine to be on the you don't, because it just seemed like a lot of work.
Yeah.
And a lot of hours and a lot of commitment. It's like there's a lot to get to the level that they're at, and I wasn't ready to like play catch up.
Sure.
So I understand why people don't. Now that I've done it, I'm like, oh, I should probably be more open to a lot more shows, because I wonder what I'd be like addicted to.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so happy it's off the bucket list. I will say it's fun too to now that House of the Dragon's out, I can be a part of the conversations on a whatever. But in terms of the water cooler talk, where it's like the next morning people are talking about Game of Thrones, it's like you have to really get lucky if someone happens to mention Game of Thrones these days. It's not really talked about the level it was in 2019, 2020, whatever. Yeah. It's on the decline, but it's fun to be at the House of the Dragon part of things now. I should just not be stubborn and watch it when I want to watch it instead of waiting for the perfect time.
Well, so many people like it that you're like, okay.
Just get in.
Yeah.
Wow.
My last thing for you guys, were people right about this show? And sort of in this way.
Great show.
Who was
horrible
right?
ending.
Who
Absolutely.
was right?
The internet is right. Isabel is right. People that historians are going to be talking about this forever.
Yes.
I feel like TV critics will forever, and I love
it will always be like a good show, bad ending.
Good show, bad ending.
It's funny to see a show that is talked about so much and has so much influence, but is so
also hated.
So hated
by its own fans.
But yeah.
No one is more critical of Game of Thrones than
Game of Thrones fans. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
It is pretty cool.
It's a good conversation.
I think it's funny too to notice like when writers write for the plot, the story, the characters, versus when the outside influence of a fan base of this caliber influence their decisions in the final edit.
Any parting thoughts?
If you want to watch it and you're like, I've watched a pilot and I'm not into it, but I want to be into it the way other people are, just pick like a random episode in like season 5 or 6, and you won't know who any of the characters are. You're not going to remember it. That's how all my friends started it, besides you.
I think you should watch it in order, top to bottom.
Well, then give it like 3 episodes.
You know what I'd say? I'd say watch the House of the Dragon season 1 and then watch Game of Thrones.
Maybe
I'm telling
you
everyone
could do that.
It's a prequel. You can do it if you want the action and you love
but
the
that's
character
also
in the world.
beware that House of the Dragon will the story of House of the Dragon will be spoiled for you in Game of Thrones. They will say what happens in the Dance of Dragon.
I'd like to clarify that at the time of this recording, House of the Dragon Season 2 is not finished yet.
House of the Dragon Season 2 finale is tomorrow.
Yeah. So
today's Friday. House of the Dragon Season 2 finale is
Sunday.
I was trying to add like a little more excitement, because if we say tomorrow, it's like we're on the precipice.
Yeah. We're on the precipice.
It like mostly on TikTok.
So overall consensus, I think, from us would be, hey, watch
Give it a shot.
Watch
Give
it.
a shot.
Watch it.
Hey, even if you hate the last season.
For a reason.
People love it for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Is this your favorite show as well? Of all time?
Yeah, I would say
it's top 5 for me.
Yeah, I would say it fluctuates for sure, just depending. But like when I think it's something that I will always be able to go back to and be like, I'm still just as obsessed with this as I was when I watched it.
It's definitely top 5 for me.
So it's I would say it's if not my favorite one, at least like top 3.
I think that's going to be it from us.
Thank you guys so much for listening. We are so excited to announce that we have our Instagram up and running. It is in good hands with the current DTV board. If you look up on Instagram, DePaul TV Productions, that's where you'll be able to stay up to date on all of the fun projects DTV has in store. We highly suggest checking out our Instagram. That will be able to redirect you to our YouTube channel, to our podcast specifically, and everything in between. We have a lot of cool stuff going on. So give us a follow. And thank you for listening.
Thanks so much for watching or listening. And have a good day.
Have a lovely day.
Except to the Game of Thrones writers.
And it's for HBO, I'll be there.
Bye.